There's a deliberate effort by white oppressive forces to keep the black masses heavily demoralized, because the demoralized black population is much easier to control and subjugate. Black people are the unknowing victims of the most elaborately deployed, demoralizing, divide and rule psychological warfare campaign in world history. Demoralize, divide and rule is the method of maintaining control over a targeted population through unrelenting demoralization. This psychological warfare campaign is so obvious that it's only by not critically thinking that it cannot be seen. For when critically thinking, it becomes clear to see just how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is that virtually all black narratives that we receive from white sources are consistently negative and black racially demoralizing. That's a ridiculous scenario. Our belief shapes our thoughts and behaviors. Therefore, those who controls our belief shapes our thoughts and behavior. White oppressive forces have exploited their monopoly over the information that we receive and believe to manipulate us to think and behave in ways that are against our own self-interest and instead in ways that serves their white society. If you don't believe that white oppressive forces would exploit their monopoly over the information that the black population receive to garner an outcome among us that benefits themselves, you are extremely naive. And if you think that this sounds like a ridiculous conspiracy theory, it's because you don't know true history. The subjugation of the oppressed through demoralization is not a new concept. Throughout history, whenever those in power wanted to brainwash the oppressed to think and behave as they want them to do so, they've always heavily demoralized them. By heavily demoralizing a targeted population, you can destroy their morale. By destroying their morale, it can even prevent their will to fight against their oppressors. This is the true reason why virtually all information that black people receive about ourselves from the white society are consistently black racially demoralizing. Demoralizing, divide, and rule is a very effective tactic. No group can be constantly subjected to unrelenting demoralization and not suffer some adverse effect. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects the targeted population in terms of their behavior. Here's a basic example of how it works. When people constantly receive fraudulent, negative, demoralizing information about themselves, they become heavily demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and they become more compliant with the dominance of other racial groups over their lives. In fact, many will even prefer it. This also creates self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds them as a people, and they can then be ruled over indefinitely. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an applied objective. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most of those people will act accordingly to the information because they've all been given the same disinformation about themselves. This nefarious psychological warfare tactic works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of black people. Here's a basic example of how this psychological warfare tactic actually works. Imagine that a crew was out at sea aboard their very own well-functioning ship, and that their ship was being followed by a second ship. A second ship constantly broadcasting fraudulent, derogatory, negative message about themselves, about the first ship's crew. Such messages telling them that their ship was lesser, not seaworthy, perhaps slowly sinking, or that their crew was incompetent. With time, the crew constantly receiving those negative, derogatory narratives about themselves being unable to refute nor confirm them, will grow weary, paranoid, and will eventually come to accept the negative assessments about themselves. This will eventually cause the targeted crew to become distrustful towards themselves, doubtful of their own abilities, and self-hating. The targeted crew may even become so besieged by deep feelings of self-hatred and resentment towards their own fellow crew members that many may jump into the sea and swim toward the taunting ship, now believing that the taunting ship is a superior one, even if their own ship was in fact the superior one. This entire process was accomplished by constantly inundating the ship's crew with negative, fraudulent, demoralizing information about themselves. Its weapon was the negative narratives and the way that those negative narratives affected the targeted crew. It is a process with the objective to erode the morals of a targeted population through continuous demoralization. By destroying their morale, it can even prevent their will to fight against their enemies. It's very effective. No group can be constantly inundated with negative, demoralizing disinformation about themselves and not be negatively effective. It's not possible. Within a real world setting, this same demoralized, divide and rule psychological warfare tactic is what's being presently deployed against the Black population by white oppressive forces. The white society writes all Black narratives, and they control all Black mainstream media images. They therefore literally owns Black people's interpretation of our collective state. They've transformed this unfair scenario into their greatest weapon used for controlling and subjugating Black people. This system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects the Black population to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent Black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the Black population without being challenged nor counterbalanced by an equal amount of Black positive racially affirming information. It conveys the subliminal message that Black people are now our own worst enemies, that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that Black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when Black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. With time, being unable to refute the constant negative information about ourselves, many Black people eventually comes to accept those false negative narratives about ourselves. The ultimate goal is to demoralize the Black population to such an extent that we begin to doubt our own ability to govern ourselves, and we believe that we therefore need white people to govern over our lives. Moreover, that we're better off living under white dominance, and therefore we abandon all hopes of ever liberating ourselves. It also creates Black self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving people certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation of people towards an applied objective. Those Black people that do not critically think never notice their mental change. Those Black people that insist that they've confirmed their negative assessment about our racial group based upon their own individual experiences are delusional, because it's not humanly possible to assess the collective state of millions of people based upon anyone's individual experiences. It's not humanly possible. Those negative perceptions about our racial group were actually deliberately embedded into our minds by white oppressive forces that controls the media contents that we receive. The white media shapes our perceptions through the narratives and media images that they routinely present to us. The reason why many Black people insist that they have confirmed their negative assessments about our racial group based upon their own individual experiences, although they've in fact not, is because once a false belief has been successfully embedded into the human mind, the person will then only notice those incidents that appears to confirm the false embedded belief, and they become psychologically blinded from noticing a greater amount of evidence refuting the embedded belief. This psychological blindness is an inherent flaw within the human psyche that's called the illusionary truth effect. Likewise, that same inherent flaw within the human psyche has been exploited by white social scientists to trap the minds of millions of Black people within a perpetual state of Black self-contempt. This psychological warfare system provides the white society with a more proficient method for controlling and subjugating Black people, given that it's not easily recognized, nor is it easily comprehended by most of its Black victims. For unlike the past racist systems that Black people were easily able to identify and therefore develop counter strategies against, this system is not easily recognized, nor is it easily comprehended by many of its Black victims. This psychological warfare program works so well, in fact, that it not only makes Black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in many cases makes us prefer it and makes us self-hating of our own race. It is at the root of the profound self-hatred and division that afflicts so much within the Black community. It is why many of us insist that we're our worst enemies and we defend the white society in spite of a brutal history to the contrary. Those who are ignorant think that our symptoms is caused by a slave syndrome. It is not. The oppressor's depiction of the oppressed is never a true one. It's always falsely, negatively distorted to serve the nefarious hidden agendas of the oppressors. This fact has remained consistent throughout history, and it is still true now. We must wake up to our reality. It is still true now. Sadly, to our own detriment, the oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. That is a quote from Franz Fanon. Brothers and sisters, it is time to wake up. It is time to wake up.